Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Okay, here we go. It's another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, everybody, it's David Summers, and this is the story of wrestling in America as told by the Stud, whose family started the profession over 100 years ago. So now let's step back into the ring, back into time. Let's get wall-to-wall, treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. All right, Ron, who you got in the Super Bowl coming up this Sunday?
Oh, gee, man, I don't know. One of those teams is the winners just about, seems like, for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, man. So kind of hard. If I was a betting man, I'd have a hard time betting against them.
It's hard to bet against KC. So I was not expecting either team was going to make it this year, either KC or the 49ers, but it seems like it's going to be an interesting game. Do you plan some kind of special food for the game?
Oh, man, I don't usually, but I've been doing a little bit on College Game Day, and I get maybe a little snack for the game. So I'm sure I'll have to have something, man.
Yeah, you don't have to pay for that at the end of the year, do you? Around the midsection, maybe a little.
Yeah. But man, I still go to the gym, thank goodness. So
that's
I'm
awesome.
still kind of watching out for that stuff.
That is awesome. All right, listen, we're hearing every week now from Studcast fans around the world that the last 5 or so Studcasts may be the best yet, and I certainly wouldn't doubt that. I can personally tell you, Ron, the new hidden history lessons every week are just really cool, and so I'm always awaiting the next one and the next Studcast. So the series of lessons on problems with the boxing and wrestling commissions, I think that is really cool. So we are going to do the third one today. That's really cool, Ron.
Yeah, so I'm glad to hear that, Dave. We've been receiving record responses from listeners, man. I have, and since discussing topics that have probably been rare, if ever done before on any wrestling podcast, basically. And so these boxing and wrestling commissions were the last thing that wrestling owners needed, that was for sure. And they became so powerful that most promoters hesitated to confront them at all, much less try to eliminate them like we've been doing in the last episode or so. In fact, we're going to be eliminating another one of them today.
Wow. Okay, so I really think that's why fans are so interested in the subject. The mere fact that one of your family members had some responsibility in their creation and you, in the last Studcast, almost by yourself, killed one of them, makes the story compelling for all of us. So I really can't wait for today's lesson.
Well, man, in today's, we're going to bring in my father, Edward Welch, better known as Buddy Fuller. Obviously, he is a member of the second generation of Welches, and he and I are going to join forces in this one to become a real-life tag team, basically, against the Alabama Boxing and Wrestling Commission.
So why did the two of you choose to go after the Alabama Boxing and Wrestling Commission specifically?
Well, my father was still involved with Jerry Jarrett in the ownership of the Memphis territory in 1980, and they ran some cities in northern Alabama. And after I put an end to the Tennessee Commission in the last Studcast in 1978, a couple of years earlier than where we are now, in in 1980 in this Studcast today. So they were enjoying basically, because I had done in the Tennessee Commission, they were enjoying the absence and the a lack of aggravation that came from having a commission to have to deal with. Plus, they didn't mind the additional profit that was gained by killing the 10% commission fee, which is an outrageous amount of money. So then the state of Alabama still had their own commission at this point, based in large part, 1980 we're talking about, upon the template that my grandfather Roy had used to develop the Tennessee Commission. Now, although the Memphis Territory ran just a small piece of the state of Alabama, our Southeastern Territory contained 3 major markets. And that's what we're going to talk about in each of these studcasts. We've been talking about them all the time. Those 3 markets are Mobile, Montgomery, and Dothan. So in 1980, our Southeastern Territory was negotiating with Nick Gulas, Roy's former Tennessee partner. We wanted to buy from Nick Huntsville and Birmingham, Alabama. Nick had grown older like Roy. He was trying to sell all of his wrestling holdings, and we were interested in getting our hands on Birmingham especially, which was the state's largest city, and it was traditionally the best wrestling city in the state. But that kind of was changing a little bit now because Mobile was starting to rival Birmingham for being a great wrestling market.
Oh, yeah, you've been talking about that week to week now. So, all right, so if you got those 2 cities added to everything else you were running in Alabama, you would basically have the entire state. Getting rid of the Alabama Boxing Wrestling Commission would make it a lot more sensible after that purchase. You said last Studcast that you were able to get rid of the Alabama Commission in a very different way than you did the one in Tennessee. What was the difference?
Well, man, it was totally different. So my father and I, he's running some towns in Alabama, and we agreed that, in looking at this, that there's a potential way to eliminate all of the rest of the boxing and wrestling commissions, actually in the entire country, and might be able to do it in the same way, legally in the court. You could go in there and make the case that because these taxes were on just 2 sports, boxing and wrestling, and no other professional sports in the state, that was a discriminatory tax against only boxing and wrestling. That obviously would make it illegal.
All right, so that does make a lot of sense, but why would it be legal to tax just 2 sports and allow all the other professional sports to not be taxed? So what did you do next?
So, to us, it made a lot of sense. Well, at the end of 1980, we had completed the deal to purchase most of the rest of Alabama from Nick Gulas. My father and I, we hired a group of Alabama attorneys to abolish the Alabama tax on boxing and wrestling. That was the task we gave them. That was what they were basically said they were going to do. And obviously, they were going to use the case that it was a discriminatory tax against only 2 sports rather than all sports.
All right. So what happened with that?
Well, in early 1982, we got this started in 1980. It took us 2 years in court. We won the case. So the Alabama state tax on boxing and wrestling was abolished, and the Alabama Boxing and Wrestling Commission was obviously no longer needed in the state.
Wow. So you got that done. Congratulations, Stud.
Well, I wish, man. Not so fast, I guess I got to say, Dave. The commission and the state, they appealed the decision to a higher court. And for most of 1983, we didn't have to pay any tax or commission. But by the end of 1983, the higher court came back and reversed the decision, and the state law and commission was reinstated.
Are you serious? How could that law be legal? I mean, I don't know. All right, but you said you killed the Alabama. You said you killed the Boxing and Wrestling Commission and tax. So now it's back in. So what happened next? How did you kill it later again?
Yes, man, and this is crazy. I mean, I told you this is totally different than the way the Tennessee Athletic Commission got knocked out. So one of my ticket sellers, once we got hold of Birmingham, there was a lady that sold tickets for us every Monday night in Birmingham. And she was married to an Alabama state representative. And she was the lady that every Monday night was in charge of handling, paying out people. And one of those entities that she was dealing with was the Boxing and Wrestling Commissioner. It would come by. Now the Boxing Commission was back in at this point and pick up the 10% of the gross house. So this lady understood perfectly all that we had been going through. She knew about the court case. She knew about us winning it, knew about it being overturned. And she was really upset with the reversal of the state and in the court. And she told her husband about it. So he, too, kind of saw the obvious discrimination of the tax and how wrong it was. And so he got in touch with me, and we sat down, and we put together a plan, basically to secretly get rid of the tax and the commission both. And what we were going to do, because he was in the state capitol and a state representative, we had a plan to kill both of those entities at the same time, this time by passing a law in the state capitol that eliminated them. So I spent 2 weeks in Montgomery with my new friend, and this guy was a great guy. And we were secretly meeting with politicians, guys that were on the Capitol Hill with him, and I was, shaking hands and discussing the discrimination of the tax and what had happened in the court case, and the building support for the new law, trying to build support for this law that he had written up the law, and to abolish the tax forever, basically. So without any of the commissioners and the lawyers that had won the case to reinstate the old law, even knowing what was going on, the state legislature of Alabama was voting on, and they passed a law that abolished the discriminatory tax levied upon boxing and wrestling.
It just seems like it gets better and better. You are back at a state capitol again, this time in Alabama, Montgomery, of course. And this time you helped get a law passed that eliminated the tax and the commission forever. So, okay, congratulations again, Ron.
I wished I would, Dave, but not so fast again, I got to say.
What?
The law was passed, but to me, it wasn't done yet. And I was very concerned that there was still one man that could veto this. And if that happened, it would bring it all back to having a tax and a commission again. And that man was the governor of Alabama, George Wallace.
Yep.
And George had ran for president in 1968. He got shot. He was paralyzed from the waist down, been that way for many years at this point. I needed to see him.
Okay, so I thought there was no way you could top all this, but I guess I was wrong. So now you are going to see the four-time governor of the great state of Alabama, George Wallace. So what were you thinking, that you could just walk in the door of the governor's office and get something done? So how are you going to get in to see him?
Well, this is crazy, Dave, but I kind of had an ace in the hole. And because one of the owners of the Southeastern Gulf Coast Territory with me and his father had been friends with George Wallace since the early 1970s. That partner is Jimmy Golden and his father named Bill. And they ran a territory based out of Montgomery, Alabama for years in the early 1970s. So they were obviously on Montgomery TV's television station every week, and wrestling was pretty popular back in those days. Mm-hmm. So Jimmy and his father had met with George on several occasions. So luckily it turned out George Wallace was a current wrestling fan in 1980. This is years later. It's like 10 years later, right? And so Jimmy finally gets connected with Governor Wallace, and he was willing to meet with him, and he also turned out to watch wrestling a lot. And he said, I'd like to meet that Ron Fuller of the Tennessee Stud. So I get invited, thank goodness, to this meeting.
Okay, I'm curious now because there's some really cool places around Montgomery. So where did you have this meeting?
Well, ma'am, we went right to the governor's office, man, at the Capitol in Montgomery. and when we went in, he was in his wheelchair behind his desk, and the first thing he said to us was, obviously he understood this probably better than anybody at this point. He said, "Gosh, I can't believe how healthy and blessed you guys are to be athletes. And look at you, you're healthy and you walk around and get around, And so we had some small talk for a few minutes, and then he kind of got around. And he said, "Hey, what can I do for you guys?" Right? I mean, obviously we wanted to meet with him, and I'm sure governors were accustomed to that type of thing. So I quickly laid out what had happened to us as wrestling promoters and owners in the state for years at this point, and talked to him about the discriminatory tax that we'd been paying for years against only 2 professional sports when there were other sports in the state that remained untaxed. And then the court case that we had won to abolish that tax had been overturned by the influence, basically, of the Alabama Boxing and Wrestling Commission. They didn't like the fact they were going to get killed. They wanted to continue to do what they were doing. And they were kind of running their business kind of like the Tennessee the people had done in their commission there. So it was basically the first time he had even heard of an Alabama Boxing and Wrestling Commission. And then I explained to him what the Boxing and Wrestling Commission was and why it had been created years earlier. And basically, it was for the same reason that Roy had created in Tennessee. Jimmy and his father wanted to control wrestling in the Montgomery area and that part of Alabama. So I explained that the commission was responsible for the collection of this 10% gross tax on each of the live events now, and I further explained how that commission was likely being handled very much like the same Boxing and Wrestling Commission in Tennessee. Then I kind of explained that I had been partially responsible for them abolishing that tax and that commission in Tennessee due to the Sunshine Committee, which was there in 1978. He was a little bit familiar with that because I think Alabama had the same type of deal in 1978. So he was generally disturbed by what was happening to us, from members of the commission, and he'd never heard of it either. So he asked if we had tried to have something done about it in the state legislature. And then I told him that was why we were here. I told him, we'd already done that. And we were already successful in getting the tax, get this bill passed that eliminated the commission and the discriminatory tax. Well, he was like, wow. He goes, I didn't even know about that yet. He goes, geez, you got that done? I said, yes, it's been passed. And so then, he said, it looked like, well, it looks like to me you've taken care of your problem here, Said, so what more could I do for you? What can I do for you now? So I was very honest with him, So I said, hopefully, you can support our efforts on what the legislature had already passed, and then hopefully you can don't allow this commission to get back involved and to do what they did in the courts, and to come in the back door basically, and to get your veto here somehow on what has already been passed. So he said, basically, he said, I don't think you boys are going to have any more trouble ever with this Boxing and Wrestling Commission.
Wow. All right, so it sounds like a pretty good meeting. How did it end?
Well, it ended a little like my grandfather Roy. Roy had for those years, have been supporting these governors and making contributions and all that stuff.
Okay.
So there I am, and I know what the deal is, and so. I kind of handled this part of it a little bit like my granddad. So it was an election year.
Here it comes.
So I handed him a campaign contribution from Southeastern Wrestling. I gave him a check for $5,000 campaign contribution. And that was the last time Dave ever saw George Wallace. And that was the last time I ever heard from the Boxing and Wrestling Commission.
All right. George Wallace was just a legendary character in this state, no doubt. Just a legendary figure. All right, I thought I heard all of your stories, Stud, but this is, and by the way, that did sound like your grandfather. I've heard those stories before, too. This is definitely one of the best stories I've ever heard from you. I have to say it again. I mean, it's a remarkable life you've lived. Last week, you were talking about hanging out with Governor Ronald Reagan, and this week, Governor George Wallace. So is this the last of the Boxing and Wrestling Commission story, Stud?
Well, no, Dave. Next week, man, is going to be the last one. And I have to say about this one next week that the one next week is probably going to be the best of all these stories about Boxing and Wrestling Commissions. Next week, we're going to take a deep dive, man, into how Vince McMahon Jr. handled his Boxing and Wrestling Commission problem. And by being the first promoter in history to throw professional wrestling under the bus is how he handled it.
All right. Are you kidding, Ron? I mean, I've heard very little about that. You're messing with me, right? So I'd like to hear that lesson right now, but we got a long ride ahead of us. Before the break, tell us about the card, and let's get that set up for Mobile Tuesday, February 5th, 1980. How about that?
Okay, my man. And it was another great card, man. The opening match was Eddie Boulder versus the great Don Fargo, man. Second talent in a row. Came right along behind Don Carson a week later, basically, being the first of these two guys, great guys, both talented. And we had basically confiscated these guys from the small little competing wrestling company in the Pensacola area at that time called Tri-State Wrestling. Kind of back like the suggestion that I made to Jim Barnett when he bought Knoxville from me he should go and get a couple of stars out of the other company, the crew, and bring them into his crew and be able to maybe kill that opposition. So basically, that's basically what we had done here at this point. We took Don Carson. Now Don Fargo came the next week. And so in the second match on this card, on the 5th, was Terry Orndorff against Big Bill Dromo. Tony Charles was going to be wrestling the Big C. Wrestling Pro was going up against Randy Rose, the man who had been after him for a long time at this point, and who the Pro had recently unmasked, and they were going to be finally meeting in something that was going to settle all of this feud for sure. And it was going to be a loser-leave match between the two of them. For the Southeastern Tag Championship, the champions, Robert and I, were defending the belts again against Jimmy Golden and Norvell Austin. This time we were going to be in a Texas Tornado Tag match, which meant all four of us were going to be in the ring at the same time. It was going to be for the championship.
Wow.
Main event was for the Southeastern Heavyweight Championship. The new champion, Mongolian Stomper, managed by Don Carson, was going to be against the former champion, Joe Leduc. They were going to be in a Canadian lumberjack match. And that was the type of match where wrestlers all had belts. They went to the ring for the match. They surrounded the ring. They had belts that they could use out of their pants. They would pull the belts out of their pants or whatever type of belt they wanted to use. Mm-hmm. And they would surround the ring. And when one of the guys decided he wanted to get out of the ring, they would whip him until he got back in the ring.
Okay, that's a great card, no doubt. Another star, Don Fargo, joins the crew. A loser leaves match will see the end of the Wrestling Pro and the Randy Rose feud. You said a Texas Tornado tag match with all four men in the ring and the Southeastern title at stake in a pretty rare Canadian lumberjack match. All right, so let's take the break. When we come back, you can tell us about the TV show that set it all up. The Studcast will continue in a moment right here. You know, Studcast fans already know that Studcast have always been special and listened to by fans all over the world, but they're now more popular than ever. Don't miss next week's Studcast, number 337, when Ron finishes his great Hidden History series on boxing and wrestling commissions. This last one features the most controversial decision ever made to deal with boxing and wrestling commissions. That decision was made by Vince McMahon Jr., the greedy man that had already destroyed professional wrestling as it had been for more than 80 years, topped that by admitting wrestling was not real, simply to avoid paying the state tax being charged on his matches around the country by the boxing and wrestling commissions, still there. So it's going to be a great one. Don't miss the Stud's take on this amazing subject. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back into the second half of another Studcast. This one is called, episode number 336, by the way, Pro Rose Loser Leaves, Second Commissioner Gone. All right, so let's get started on the second half with the TV to promote the card you told us about just moments ago that would be in all three major cities that you told us about right before the break. Set all that up for us, Stud.
Okay, so it basically opened with Charlie Platt at the set. And he was making a special announcement right off of the bat as soon as the show opened up that February was going to be a championship month on TV. It was going to have a championship match every Saturday in the entire month. And so that got a huge response, obviously, from the fans. And then they got an even bigger one when he announced that the first one, this first match today, because this was the first Saturday in February of 1980, was going to be for the Southeastern tag belts with me and Robert defending the title on television. So then he invited Joe Leduc to the set. So Joe at this point had lost the belts on the Wednesday night prior to this with Don Carson, got involved in the match, and Stomper ended up with the Southeastern Championship again. So Joe came to the set. He didn't have the belt, but he was there because he was going to watch the match from Mobile 4 days earlier. It was going to show the reason why he lost the belt. So Charlie explained that the Mongolian Stomper had lost his manager, the Great Mephisto, the week before, in the loser leaves match, which was actually 2 weeks before, against Tony Charles, had beaten Mephisto. Mephisto had to leave the territory. And that on this night, when Stomper came to the ring, everybody was expecting he's going to come to the ring alone, by himself. And instead, Stomper surprised everybody. When he came to the ring, he had a brand new manager, Don Carson. So Joe told fans, he said, I'm very familiar with Don Carson. He goes, I've had a lot of run-ins with him, and he managed the Mongolian Stomper in Tennessee years ago, before George Jr. took over the Mongolian Stomper. And he goes, I'm very familiar with Don Carson and know exactly who he is and what he's about. So before the video started, Joe explained, to his regret, he said that Don Carson was now obviously in charge of the Mongolian Monster. He changed his name. He started to call him the Mongolian Monster instead of the Stomper. And then he said, Joe told Charlie, he thought that all the managers that the Stomper had that he was aware of, Gorgeous George Jr., the Great Mephisto, and now Don Carson again, he said Carson is by far, I think, the most dangerous of the three. And he goes, that's basically why I lost the belt. The very first night that Carson showed up as the Stompers, Monsters, as the Mongolian Monsters manager, he called him. So Charlie asked the director to run the video. And everyone was going to see how Joe lost the championship. And when the video began, the bell had just rang, and the Mobile fans were about to get their first look at Don Carson wearing a suit, coming to the ring with the Mongolian Stomper. And so, boy, that building, Expo, was always packed at this point, Expo Hall in Mobile. And wow, did they boo. Man, they did not like seeing Don Carson there again. So Joe said, he was surprised by the fans' reaction because he was very honest. He said, I didn't know anything about Don Carson's history down here. He goes, I know what he was like in Tennessee, but I never knew he was even here before. But he said when he came to the ring and that crowd erupted in boos like that, he goes, I got to thinking, man, I don't know everything I ought to about this guy, And he says, this ain't going to be good for me or the fans, it doesn't seem like. So then the video jumped from there to the last few minutes of the match. And the action in the ring was so wild at that point that a second referee had come down to the ring to help the first referee. And the video showed Carson about to get in the ring at this point, and Rob and I were back there watching the match. We knew Carson's history, plus we wanted to see this match. I love to watch these matches between Stomper and Joe because they were ways wild. And so Rob and I see Carson headed like he's going to go in the ring, and we went down to the ring. Well, by the time we got there, here came Golden and Austin, and Norvell. They had gone to the dressing room to avoid getting beat earlier. So, they came down to the ring. And when they did, we got into it. Rob and I against Golden and Austin. There's a match going on in the ring. So the second referee that had got in the ring to help the first one out now got out of the ring because he's trying to stop us from fighting. Then Eddie Boulder came to the ring. Then Roy Lee Welch came to the ring. Then Terry Orndorff came. Big Bill Dromo came to the ring. All of them showed up about the same time, and they started right into the fight that was already going on out on the floor. So at this point, first referee is still in the ring, Stomper and Joe Leduc. And so the referee's trying to pull Stomper off of Joe Leduc. And all this is on the video. People can see it all. Joe drew everybody's attention, to Don Carson at this point, saying, this is basically where Carson is going to steal my belt. So it showed Don Carson jump in the ring at this point. Now the referee's trying to pull Stomper off. He doesn't see Carson. Carson reaches in the back of his suit coat, underneath his suit coat, and pulls out his black glove that Big C has been wearing. Right? And he puts it on his hand, and he loads it up, and he hits Joe with it and jumps out of the ring. Neither of the two referees even see him ever get in the ring at all. Stomper then walks over, basically, and covers Joe Leduc, and the first referee counted him out, and all hell was breaking loose on the outside of the ring. So Joe asked him to stop the video. He says, hey, that's enough. We've seen what happened here. And then he apologized to the fans, he's about having lost the belt. He goes, I was only champion for 1 week. I'm so sorry, but, he goes, but I got to thank, there's something good has come out of this. He goes, I thank Don Curtis. He said, I asked Don Curtis if I could have a return championship match because of the way I lost this one. And I asked him if I could tell him what type of match I wanted. And he said, and he agreed to it. So he stood up in his chair. He didn't say what kind of match it was going to be. Mm-hmm. And he started taking the belt out of his pants while he's talking to Charlie. And he says, Charlie, since all those wrestlers were down at the ring, he's talking about what they just showed. And he said, when I lost my championship, fighting each other, he says, they're going to be back again in this special match that I've asked for. And he said, this time, he goes, they're going to come back with belts. And he says, it's going to be just like me right now, just like we used to do it back in the day in the old lumberjack camps in Canada. He said, when two guys got into it, they would create a circle around the guys. They would take off their belts. And when somebody tried to leave that circle because he didn't want to get beat any worse while he was in the circle, he goes, they're going to take those belts to him until he comes back into the ring. And he goes, And that's going to give me a chance, then, Charlie, to take care of business. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's taking his belt off as he's saying all this. When he got to the end of it, he rears back and he slangs that belt across the desk right by Charlie. And it sounded like a gun went off. And Charlie almost fell out of his seat. And then Joe continued, and he said, "We're going to have a Canadian lumberjack match for the Southeastern belt." And he goes, "There's going to be no place for the Stomper to run, or Don Carson to hide his black glove." And he goes, "Next week," he goes, "I promise all you fans, I'm going to be back with my Southeastern belt." Studio crowd popped as Joe went from the ring, went straight into the ring. He was in the first match.
I can see Charlie Platt. I can just see him jumping when that belt popped. I jumped just hearing about it. All right, so what a great start to the show on TV. So what about the next TV match?
Well, Leduc went in the ring, and he still had the belt with him, and he just laid the belt across the top of the turnbuckle in the corner of the ring. They introduced him and his opponent, and they rang the bell, and it didn't take long for Joe to take care of whoever his opponent was. But he had this guy finished. He had him in his bear hug. But he had his back to the Heels TV dressing room when he had him in the bear hug. And all of a sudden, out of the dressing room, the Stomper darted, man. And he went into the ring, straight into the ring. He had no shirt on. He actually had his wrestling gear on. And he just darted up into the ring and headed toward Joe. And for the studio crowd, they let Joe know he was coming, basically, right away. As soon as they saw him come out of the dressing room and get to the ring, they let Joe know something's happening behind you. So Joe reached over and he grabbed that belt that was laying on the top of the turnbuckle. Stomper saw him grab the belt and he made a run for it. But he didn't get there. Joe got him across the back with that thing before he could get onto the floor. The crowd popped, man, and so did that belt on the Stomper's back. And so Carson came running from the dressing room. He had a towel. He threw a towel over the Stomper's back, and he rushed him into the dressing room. And so Joe stood there in the ring, man, swinging that belt around over his head, celebrating with the fans. They were going crazy.
Wow. All right. So literally 2 pops in that first TV segment. All right. What about next? What was next?
Well, someone fans had not seen for a long time was next, man. And he got the same kind of reception that Don Carson got in Mobile days earlier in that first video. They didn't like him, man, any more than they liked Don Carson, and that was Don Fargo. Fabulous Don Fargo. He got booed almost out of the studio, man. I mean, and Fargo was the type of guy, he loved that. It just made him want to be vicious, right? Mm-hmm. He wanted to make them scream louder. So, he wanted to make them even madder. So in the end of his match, he put a guy in the Boston Crab, which is a very, very devastatingly painful hold. And then the guy gave up right away, but he wouldn't let him up. And he forced the referee to have to pull him out of the hold. And long after the opponent had given up, he should have gotten disqualified, but he didn't.
All right, so take us to the personality profile. What was that like?
Well, we had to prepare for this one before anybody arrived in the studio because of who was going to be on it. So we moved that profile set, which was always sitting right next to the bleachers, across the studio on the far wall, far away from the studio audience. And Charlie introduced the 2 men on the profile, and boy, they got the loudest boos probably of the day so far, and one of the loudest I'd ever heard in that studio up to that point. Don Carson was dressed in a suit, and the Mongolian Stomper had on warm-up pants, no top on at this point, and he was wearing the Southeastern belt that he had just won. So Carson waved at the fans in the bleachers right off as if he was enjoying his reception. And the first words out of his mouth to Charlie was, boy, they really love me here, don't they, Charlie? So from there on, man, it was all patting Don Carson on the back. And even if it was him that was having to do the patting, I mean, he bragged about his first night and how he had led the Stomper to victory, man. And then now he was the Southeastern champion. And they were back together again. They hadn't been together as a team in a long, long time and years. And this belt wasn't never going to belong to anybody. It went on and on and on, as only Carson could do. And so obviously he was so pompous, man. He took all the credit for Stomper's victories, man. All the titles he wanted to tell the Stomper had won when he had him before. It was just a heyday for Carson. So Charlie asked him, he said, was it not this new wrestler? What do you know? He said basically about this new wrestler that's called Big C, that that wears a black glove just like the one that you used in this first video that we watched today, Don Carson. He goes, what can you tell us about him? And his why is it that he has a black glove, the same one that you got somehow your hands on? And so Carson said, well, there's I'm not similar to this guy in any way whatsoever, in any way at all. Yeah. What are you trying to do here, Charlie Platt? You trying to cause me a problem? So from then on, the studio crowd, they booed everything he said, basically. Several times the Stomper put his hands over his ears to kind of get relief from the noise. So obviously that made, when he did that, fans were booing him even louder. So at the end of the profile, Don got pretty angry, saying that, the Southeastern commissioner, he goes, Charlie, you brought up the segment up here in the show. He goes, how come Don Curtis allowed Joe Leduc to pick the kind of title match that he wanted with my Stomper? And he goes, this type of match, these Canadian lumberjack matches are very cruel, and he asked the Stomper, he said, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about to prove it, Charlie Platt. And he told the Stomper, he said, turn around. And when he did, and he said, he said, I'm going to show you, I'm going to prove you, Charlie, how bad these matches are. So he told Stomper to turn around. And when he did, man, Stomper turned around. There was a gasp from the studio crowd, man. There was a red bruise mark the width of Joe Leduc's belt all the way across the Stomper's back. It was obvious, that Joe, it was from Joe hitting him earlier in the show. Mm-hmm. So, then Carson said, it's terrible what can happen to what these lumberjack matches can do to a human body. So then Carson said, this type of match, he said, it should be outlawed in wrestling. He goes, the only reason we got this match is because it comes from Canada. And he said, Canadians are nothing but animals up there, He goes, this is ridiculous. So the studio crowd booed him until Charlie asked him. He said, can you imagine, he says to Charlie, he says, Charlie, he goes, can you imagine what something like that thing on my Stomper's back would look like across my back? Well, boy, the studio popped in. They loved that line. Oh, they were all into that. So he screamed, Carson screamed for him to shut up, and Charlie jumped up from the set, and they closed the profile.
Oh, man. Don Carson was always going to make it exciting no matter what. It didn't matter if you liked him or hated him. Okay, so a totally different profile than what we had been having, but just as good. I got to say that. All right, so what about the third segment of the TV show?
Well, a wrestling pro came to the set, and he was going to watch what had happened in Dothan, Alabama. that ruined his last chance. He made the point. I always loved. He told Charlie, he said, I always wanted to win that United States Junior Heavyweight Championship belt. And he goes, this was my last chance to win it. I had these 3 matches with Tony Charles for it. And he said, Tony and I wrestled 2 45-minute time limit draws, one in Montgomery and one in Mobile. And he goes, and then this video is going to show what happened in the third one. So then as they started the video, it was a completely different finish than a 45-minute Broadway, obviously. So it was, but it was just as good and clean match. They showed a portion of it in the first part. Wow, it was 2 guys that were great wrestlers that were shaking hands, and wow, beautiful match, beautiful wrestling match. Until Tony Charles, in this video here, he tries to leapfrog the wrestling pro, and he comes down kind of awkwardly on his right knee, and when he did, his leg folded up underneath him. So the pro went to Charles, and he was very concerned about it. He was trying to basically help him up, He was hoping that he didn't get hurt really, really bad. And all of a sudden, Randy Rose, man, who was still in his wrestling tights, he had been in the match right before their match with Roy Lee Welch, and he came running from the dressing room, and he slid into the ring. He was behind the pro, and he hit him back of the head. And the pro went down hard, and Randy Rose jerked up Tony Charles, who was still trying to get up on his feet, and he just threw him over the top rope onto the concrete. Then he grabbed the referee, and he threw the referee over the top rope on top of Tony. And then Rose took something out of his tights, and he started hitting the pro in the head with it. And so soon the pro was bleeding. You could see it, anytime he bled, you could see it through his white mask real plainly. And Rose began to try to then take his mask off. And he almost had it off when the ref and Tony Charles kind of made their way back up into the ring, and so Rose had to exit. And when he did, the police, thank goodness, went down there because fans really loved the pro, man. They were there. They were coming to get him. And so the police were there. He kind of jumped in between them all, and they escorted him back to the dressing room. So seeing this for the first time, Pro had not seen the match back. He got really mad again, And the pro was he was a man of few words, and he told Charlie and the fans, he said that he had demanded, and he had been granted a loser leaves Southeastern match with this punk Randy Rose. He said, I've had enough. It's time to end it. And he said, if any of you fans out there, if y'all are into this guy, if you like this guy, if you ever want to see this guy again, he said, you better come to the matches next week because he's going to be gone and gone for good right now. And he got up and left the set. It was ended to a standing ovation, as always.
The wrestling pro really was a man of few words, Ron, and I don't think I ever saw him lose a loser leaves match. So who was in the third TV match?
Randy Rose. And boy, did he get a nasty reception. I mean, left the studio just as angry as they were before the match started. The studio was screaming and booing him when he got there, and they were screaming and angry when he left. And wow, he had this move. Rose was really, really getting a heck of a finish with these clotheslines, with guys off the ropes. He'd shoot them in the ropes, and then he'd catch them one way or another, sometimes across the throat with a forearm, sometimes with a chop. Wow. But in this particular match, he caught this guy with a tremendous clothesline on the throat with his basically with his inner part of his arm, his forearm, and it looked like it took the guy's head off. Wow, it was really, really an awesome looking move, and that's how he finished that guy.
Wow. Okay, I think I know who was in the last match on the TV show. You and Robert defending the Southeastern tag belts on TV, the first of 4 title matches that month on TV, right?
Right. I mean, Charlie had announced it basically at the beginning of the show that we were going to be defending our belts. And and he also made that announcement, we're in the month of February, and every week we're going to have a championship match. And so Rob and I were defending our belts against 2 masked men, the Inferno and Big C. So, that should be a great match. Those were 2 great wrestlers.
Oh, no doubt. Okay, I get it. It was TV rating period month and time to build audiences, and this kind of match is absolutely going to do that. So your opponents were both top wrestlers. In fact, wasn't this Big C's first time on TV, and he was wearing the black glove?
Yeah. Yes, it was his first time on TV, yes.
Uh-huh.
So this was the first chance for those people that had never been to the arena to see the Big C wrestle. There he came with the same black glove that Carson was famous for. So, and yes, it was his first time on TV. He had the black glove, and like I said, it was a great match, man. 2 top guys against us, basically, and it was a kind of match that built ratings, man. So we had the studio audience going crazy at the end of it, and at that point, we were about to get to hold of Big C, and what do you think he does? He leaves his partner alone with us, and he goes to the dressing room. So I beat the Inferno with the Fuller leg lock right in the middle of the ring.
Wow. All right, so did the TV audience seem to know who the Big C was wearing that black glove? Don Carson? I mean, it had made him so famous wearing the black glove, so there surely was no doubt about that, right?
They certainly did.
Okay.
They definitely knew that was Don Carson, right? From the very beginning of the match, and from the very first time they saw this guy get in the ring. Carson, not too many guys look like Carson, and very few of them wrestled in the same style. So, and the fact that he was going to be wearing a mask and wearing a black glove and calling himself
right.
Big C rather than who he really was, that made the fans even hate him more. It was like, it was like he was trying to fool them, but it wasn't fooling anybody, man. So it was really a different type of thing that we had never done before, where you got a manager and he's going to wrestle as a different person entirely. It was something that Rob and I had come up with. We wanted to see how this was going to work.
Cool. All right, a quick footnote on Don Carson. I saw him wrestle many times. How tall? He called himself Big C. That's why I'm bringing this up. How tall? What was he? Like maybe 6'2" or something?
Yeah, he might have been closer to 6'4". He was pretty tall, Don was.
Okay. I didn't realize that. All right. Awesome TV show with another championship match coming up on the next one. So how about the result of the matches the following week?
Well, Don Fargo got his first big Southeastern win over a wrestler that's very popular at this point, Eddie Boulder. He was very well liked, and he was beginning to make a little name for himself at this point, Eddie Boulder. Big Bill Dromo beat Terry Orndorff. Tony Charles was still having trouble with his knee that he had injured against the Pro the week before. And so he was in the match with the Big C. And he was actually forced to leave the ring because Big C loaded his glove and hit him in the knee with his loaded glove.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, the Big C's going to get some heat. There ain't any doubt about that. So in the Southeastern Texas Tornado tag match for the championship, it had all 4 of us in the ring at the same time, Jimmy Golden, Norvell Austin, me and Rob. And Golden and Austin, through the entirety of this match, kept leaving the ring. Leave the ring. Every time we go after them, they'd leave the ring. Then finally on the end, we got them really going, about to beat them, and they left the ring for good. They just went straight to the dressing room. Without getting beat, they basically got themselves counted out, and obviously we kept our belts. Then in the loser leaves Southeastern match between the Wrestling Pro and Randy Rose, wow, what a nasty match that was. It looked kind of like a Joe Leduc and Mongolian Stomper thing, man. It was a very bloody match, and Randy Rose got the pin. They used a foreign object, and they knocked the Pro unconscious, and he beat the Pro in a loser leave.
Wow.
Then the Canadian Lumberjack match, the Southeastern Championship match, champion Mongolian Stomper, managed by Don Carson, against Joe Leduc. This match had to be stopped, and it was absolutely wild. It's a Canadian Lumberjack match, so there's 12 guys out there, all of them with belts surrounding the ring, and they weren't just whipping Joe Leduc and the Mongolian Stomper back into the ring. But before it was over, we were all whipping each other. I mean, it was all over the building. I mean, one guy'd get to chasing another one with a belt, and they'd go one direction, and it was just wild. It was a crazy thing that got totally out of hand. So in the next Studcast, we're going to be in for 3 straight weeks, Mobile, Alabama's main arena. And so because we're in this big building, these are all going to be special matches in all 3 of these events. So in the first of these 3 nights, we're going to have not 1 cage match, but we're going to have 2 cage matches, with one with Joe and the Stomper, and one with me and Rob against Jimmy and Norvell.
2 cage matches in one night. Had you ever done that before?
Well, I'm not sure about other territories or whether any place had ever done it, but in my recollection, this was the first time we had ever done it in Southeastern Gulf Coast history. Was in Mobile on this following card, the one that's coming up next week.
All right, so let's go to attendance for those 3 major cities for the week. How'd you do on that?
Well, both Montgomery and Dothan were back over 5,000, man. They was on fire. Business was really great. And Mobile, Expo Hall had its 5th sellout in a row. That was a record at this point. 5 sellouts in a row. We drew over 16,000 fans in 3 nights. For cities the size of these 3 cities, fairly small cities, especially Dothan, to be drawn like this was absolutely phenomenal. And the territory was literally on fire.
No doubt. That's a great one, and this has really been a great one. I'm sorry to say we're not going to have time to really get into a learning tree question today. You've already mentioned in this one some special things coming in next week's Studcast. So you want to tell us about where we're riding next week?
Yeah, man. So we're going to have the final hidden history lesson about boxing and wrestling commissions. And the next one, to me, is going to be the worst example ever of a way to handle a problem with one of these state boxing and wrestling commissions. We're going to finish this lesson toward the end it's going to take place, this last one, toward the end of the 1900s. With the owner of the largest wrestling company in the world, Vince McMahon Jr., is going to do the unthinkable, basically, to save himself a little money. He's going to basically throw the sport underneath the bus, man. Crazy. And so I've done my research, Dave, that I've never done in all these years. I wanted to find out exactly how all this went down. I've done my research to find out this boxing and wrestling series, man, gathering as many facts as possible in this situation. This has to do with New Jersey, the state of New Jersey. And I'm going to next week in the next show, I'm going to highlight the most egregious act in the history of the sport, I think.
Wow. Are you going to tell us the story of Vince McMahon's breaking kayfabe, I think you call it, and choosing more money over respecting and protecting wrestling? So this next Studcast could be really historic. You also mentioned something about being in the 10,000-seat Mobile, Alabama main arena for 3 straight weeks in a row. That had to be for something pretty special right there.
It was, man. In the next 3 Studcasts, we're going to be riding the momentum, basically, of the Southeastern Gulf Coast Territory in the early part of 1980, where all this is headed toward a return of Harley Race in this next 3 Studcast with a record crowd.
Wow.
And the week after, next week, the most popular wrestler in Southeastern, after all this and Harley's there and everything else, we're going to come back after that in the 4th week with the return of the most popular Southeastern wrestling star ever, who's going to be coming back wearing a mask. To what it's going to be at this point, probably the hottest wrestling territory for its size in the world.
Oh, no doubt. It sounds like we're about to enter a time frame unlike any before in Studcast history. Can't wait for that. Hey, you guys know the deal. If you are Studcast fans, you can find Ron on Facebook at Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. Like and follow him there. Automatically become friends with a legend. The same thing on Twitter, now known as X. Find him at Ron Fuller Welch. Follow him there too. Listen, Ron takes comments, answers every comment. You can even send him a quick note, and he'll try to get back with you with an answer on that. If you've got a question about these Studcasts, it's fun to see the questions and the responses in a lot of cases on just the regular the comments that are made on the different social media. Hey, you can also check out the fantastic website at tnstud.com. tnstud.com. This Studcast is going to be there, this very one, with every Studcast ever done. Shop the Stud Store, where you get 43 Super Studcast, 4 different 8x10 photos, the thrilling lion novel called Brutus, personally autographed to you if you like, and T-shirts still on sale, only $15.99 with free shipping. And subscribe now at YouTube Southeastern Rewind. Get the best in old school wrestling. Find 392 videos, the last 113 Studcasts, 52 stud stories, 99 short rides with the stud, and now 13 great Ask the Stud question and answer shows. You can sit on the couch till you get stuck on the couch and still not see everything. All exclusively on YouTube Southeastern Rewind. Go to YouTube, in the search box, put in Southeastern Rewind. It's the first one that comes up. It's the best deal in old school wrestling. All right, ton of fun, Stud, so far. Can't wait to do it again. Any last comments on this one?
Well, yeah, as always, man, I want to thank everybody for joining us today and every day. And I certainly appreciate your support out there, all of you. And please take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.